Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Institute on Aging training. Today, we welcome two trainers from Senior Care Authority, a group which provides consultations, advocacy, caregiver support, and other services. You may visit them at www.seniorcareauthority.com, and we'll place that in the chat, and they'll also give you their information at the end of this presentation. The speakers today will address the topic of bringing peaceful resolution to complex and sensitive senior driving issues. And the speakers are from Senior Care Authority, Loretta Rotolo, MA-RDT, and DJ Colbert, Certified Patient Advocate and Healthcare Navigator. Over the past 30 years, Loretta has worked in the health and human service field in direct service roles as a therapist and advocate and in management capacities. Welcome, Loretta.
Thank you.
DJ became a board certified patient advocate after graduating from the healthcare navigation program at Sonoma State University. So welcome to both of you. I'm going to turn it over to you. And again, to the audience, if you have questions, place them in the Q&A feature and I will manage those for our speakers. I'm going to turn my camera off now. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today and for that nice introduction. My name is Loretta Rotolo, and as Caitlin said, I work with DJ Colbert, my co-host today, with Senior Care Authority, which is a senior living and elder care consulting organization that provides placement assistance, working with families to explore options in senior living. We provide elder care consulting to help people navigate the healthcare system and provide resources for families. We also provide advocacy. And so we provide a number of services, including a program that we have now called Beyond Driving with Dignity, which we will talk a little bit more about at the end of our presentation. But our topic is bringing a peaceful resolution to complex and sensitive senior driving issues. And as we know, this is a very hot topic, and we hopefully will share some facts and tips that will enable you to feel more comfortable to address these issues and to know more information about the subject. As we know, we as a society, our hot potato issue, one of them is how to address older drivers that may be displaying some diminished driving skills. Why it's a hot potato issue is that a lot of people avoid this conversation, avoid acknowledging that it's an issue. A lot of people have difficulty broaching the subject with family members or friends and loved ones. And it's kind of the situation where there's a lot of concern, but a lot of people don't want to deal with it. But it is an important issue, and we hope that we'll be able to shed some light on that today. And so how important is the issue? And as we know, we all view our driving ability as basically our ticket, our freedom. And it's a tool for us to reduce our isolation and feel more independent and self-sufficient. And so when an older adult loses this ability to drive, it can really lead to some serious feelings of loss and depression. And according to the Department of Emergency Medicine at the University of Colorado School of Medicine in Aurora, it can even lead to an early death, because the feeling of that limitation and that loss can really increase a person's feeling of desperation and feeling that they have to become dependent on others. And it is their key for mobility and feeling independent. And losing that is a serious situation for many older adults. But we have to acknowledge the fact that there are older adults that are at a greater risk of having traffic accidents. And that is why we are here to talk about that today.
The next couple of slides are assaulting to the eye and maybe bring up emotions. And they're just two examples of accidents and incidents that happen across the country every single day. And it doesn't mean that the senior themselves necessarily are hurt, but they're equally involved in causing accidents. So why is this important to note? Because that is the issue. We think that we all believe that we have a right to drive as opposed to understanding it's a privilege. We're licensed to drive, not because we exist, but because we earned the right. And at some point, there must be some way to identify we've lost the right without causing more harm. This incident was obviously a terrible tragedy that affected many, many people, and people's lives were changed forever. And what had happened was the driver that caused the accident turned in front of a younger driver who got thrown into the ditch where the utility workers were working. It was very well marked, lots of high yellow coloring. The three other utility workers that were above them in rigs witnessed this whole thing, weren't hurt themselves, but it wasn't an invisible situation. It was very, very visible. So what would cause somebody 92 to just suddenly turn in front of somebody and not notice they were coming? And the next slide is of an 87-year-old who also caused this accident. It looks horrific. And this person turned into the front of this. He was probably changing lanes, but he hit the front bumper of the fuel truck. And this was the result. And the car on the right-hand side blew over the Meridian. It's not like they were over there to begin with. These are not unusual. These are particularly challenging, but they're not the worst. Loretta.
So we have to look at the idea of, well, who will be addressing this issue of unsafe drivers, right? And do the courts play a role? I think a lot of people assume that the courts get involved and the Department of Motor Vehicles maybe gets involved. Who does address unsafe drivers that are out there? Do the physicians talk to them? Do police end up addressing it and taking people's license away? How involved are families or social workers or nurses or people or care managers that are working with the older adult? Who is really addressing the situation, and who should be the one? And why is it that maybe some of these people avoid the topic? Like we said, it's a hot potato issue. Who is really responsible for addressing this?
We would think that doctors would often have a easy time having a conversation with their patients about driving. Um, like it says, one doctor would dread having the conversation, and a palliative care doctor would rather talk about end of life than end of driving. That's a profound statement. Um, I had an experience of being a passenger in a car driving up, I'm in Northern California, driving up 101 past San Rafael. I was a passenger, and to the right I saw my mother's little white head bending in to get to the back seat of a highway patrol car on the side of the highway. Knowing she hadn't been driving because she'd already given up her license, I knew she had been a passenger. So what was going on? I told my friend Tony, we have to go back and we have to get over there. And we got to the side of the highway. There were two highway patrolmen, and I asked them what was going on. They said, well, Marge, the driver, passed out as she was driving in the fast lane, and my mom guided her the 4 lanes over to the right-hand side, trying to miss all the other cars, and they only sideswiped one car. And I say that only because this could have and should have been an unbelievable tragedy for many people, thinking of how many people's lives could have been changed in that moment. And Marge had been taken away in the ambulance, and my mom was getting in the car, and I think the officer was going to take her to her hairdresser appointment, which was where she was going. I took my mom, got her to the hairdresser, and hightailed it back to the hospital. And I asked the doctor, I said, "Are you going to do anything about her license?" And he said, "No." And he said, "I wasn't there." And I asked the highway patrolman, and they had said that they would do something, but nothing happened from the result of that, other than I contacted the DMV. But the cause of keeping people driving is us and all the other people. We think it's somebody else going to have these conversations. It's not the case. You will find these kinds of statements if you Google anywhere of neurologists, geriatricians, primary care physicians. I have conversations with them very often. They don't want to have this conversation. They don't want to be in conflict. What they want to do is be in service to their patient. They don't necessarily see causing this contentious conversation as being in service to their patient. Going forward, when we are talking about the next slide, so a physician's value is in their relationship with their patients, and they don't want to risk them not coming back. They don't want to risk their anger. Most people I've ever talked to don't like confrontation or conflict, and that brings up a lot of other issues. But in this case, it's in the way of helping people make some good choices and safer choices. When people do talk about it, they have had, when physicians have talked about it, they have lost their patients. They have had people talk bad about them to other patients. It's been like a fast-moving train that they didn't intend. Older folks feel betrayed by their physicians, the person they trust the most. So the problem is, how do we start having these conversations so that, one, the senior feels cared about, respected, and valued? And I think respect is a very huge part of this. When we start having these conversations with our clients, with the physicians that we would like to have conversations with their patients, how do we go about that? Can we have the next slide? The Beyond Driving with Dignity was created by a guy named Matt Gerwell, who is our favorite human, and he talks about his losing his stepdad, who died just before his 99th birthday. And he had been driving, what I call driving by braille, something my dad did too, which was have little accidents that he kept getting his car fixed. But he was not about to give up driving, regardless of those results, until one day he had fallen and broken his hip. And Matt had asked his doctor to please, take his license. And the doctor did report him to the Department of Motor Vehicles. However, when confronted, he didn't take responsibility for having done that and pinned it on Matt. And when his stepdad died, they had not spoken. And so that kind of pain and suffering within a family around this issue is very real. It causes us not to want to have those confrontations. It causes us not to want to get somebody upset, angry at us.
So how do we have these kinds of driving conversations? I think the main tips that we could give right now is that we need to concentrate on the driver's skills, not on their age. We know that people age differently, so we can't just say to someone, well, you're 87, you shouldn't be driving anymore. Their skills are varied, and it doesn't necessarily depend on their age. And it's much more helpful if we can concentrate on giving them specific facts, not our opinions, not just kind of give global statements, but give specifics about what exactly are they doing. Being really clear and saying, I was really worried when I was in the car and you didn't stop. You didn't seem to notice the stop sign. Or I was worried that you slowed down for no reason and stopped in the intersection. Those are specific things that you can mention that gives a person information for them to consider and gives them the facts and not just an opinion or fears that are expressed. So what we suggest, as DJ pointed out, the main thing is to be respectful, to really validate how difficult this is for them, but giving them your sincere concerns about their driving skills. Give the examples, be empathetic, show some compassion and understanding about how difficult it is to even consider giving up driving, and really meeting them where they are. Finding some alternatives for them. Don't just tell them that they shouldn't be driving anymore. Maybe start to bring up ways that they can get to appointments that don't involve their driving. Find other people to join in on these conversations, or to kind of reinforce what your concerns are. Family members, friends, relatives, neighbors. These are the people we want to enlist. Like we talk about enlisting the help of all of these people as a holistic approach. Speak to their doctor. Maybe the doctor can bring it up. Maybe their favorite nurse at the clinic. They might have a minister or a lawyer in the family that they really highly respect. There are geriatric counselors, social workers, friends, family members. We worked with one family who, when asked, who does your mom value, to listen to for advice, who would she go to? Who do you think that she has the most respect for if they expressed this to her? And they ended up saying, well, you know what, it's her ex-son-in-law. Even though the daughter was no longer married to him, the mother really maintained a close connection and said that was the person that she would most likely listen to. So whoever it is, get them involved. Have strength in numbers is what we recommend. And when talking to the adult, give them some tips and some suggestions. Just don't say, we'll find other ways of getting there. Maybe bring up some specifics that can lead them to start thinking about how to limit their driving. Telling them to, they might want to consider reducing driving at night. Maybe, Mom, maybe you should avoid going into town during the rush hour when the traffic is bad. And maybe you could try some back roads and not go on the freeway, because that seems to make you nervous when you have to merge. Or when the weather is bad, try to stay home. We can bring things to you that you need. Giving them specific suggestions would really help. Helping them to plan their routes better so that they feel more confident behind the wheel and that you feel more relaxed. But giving them specific tips greatly helps ease them into the idea of maybe they should think about retiring from driving.
I know if you were here last week, I talked about following my dad in my car in LA, and him in the right lane. So I'm following in the right lane, and he turns left on a major artery in front of traffic, which is kind of a classic error for senior drivers making poor choices. And I kept going straight because he did drive like Mr. Magoo, if you're old enough to know who that is. So I had all kinds of time to go around a whole city block and still catch up to him. And those were the reasons I would not get in a car with him. And I was clear about why I wouldn't get in a car with him, which made him angry, but nonetheless, I wouldn't do it. And he drove until the end of his life, still driving and bumping into other cars and fixing them, just like the earlier story. That's not unusual. But it's because he had the money to do so. So he kept driving because he thought it was a right. But his choices weren't very good. My grandfather, which is why I got into this field at all, he had some months before he finally had to give up driving, he had I had taken him, he lived in Oregon, and I drove up and I took him to the doctor, and he had been having some ailments. And yet, when I thought of this today as we were listening and talking about doctors and talking to their patients. And what happened was he was really failing. He was obviously listing to the side. He was not clear in his communication. He believed all of this crazy mail he was getting from shock people was personal mail, and it was all stuff to scare him out, that Social Security was going to go away, and all just terrifying stuff that got him crazy scared. So I'm taking him to the doctor. However, when the doctor comes into the room that he's now sitting in, the doctor goes, "Hi, Charlie, how are you doing?" And Grandpa, to true Grandpa form, says, "Good, good, real good. How you?" And everything that he came to talk to the doctor about is gone. So I take him back home. I come back to the doctor's office and I say, "Listen, I have a problem with how you treat him as a geriatrician. I'm going to ask you from now on, when you have a senior come in here who's made an appointment, watch them walk down the hall. Find out if he knows which way is right and which is left, because he wouldn't have passed any test had you done that." And he thanked me for that. But for some odd reason, I don't think most doctors, geriatricians or not, are thinking like this. And what happened was, not 2 months later, my mom was up in Oregon visiting him, and he wasn't there when she came to his house. Pretty soon a sheriff drives up with my grandpa in the back, and he tells her that he's had a car accident. He ran into the back of a car, and he refused medical treatment. And what happened was, he couldn't see. He was driving anyway. He had just had cataract surgery, but he had no new lenses. And he felt he could drive until he got the new lenses, and ran smack dab into the back of a car. And it took my mom and her grandpa's neighbor, hours to get him to the ER, where he found out he had a cracked sternum. And that was on a Friday night. And on Monday, he had a major stroke, which began all the series of things that most of you know about that happens when you're dealing with seniors, and all the different terrible events that start to happen as a roller coaster event. And that was the beginning of the end for him, of every imaginable thing. And all of that could have been avoided somewhere in advance of that. We know that 1 out of 3 adults 65 and over have a fall. I can attest to that for myself. But what we don't know as a routine is that falls are indicators of potential accidents in cars. Why? Because there's a lot of reasons to have a fall. If we're having multiple falls, we know that a person is 1.5 times as likely to be involved in an accident who fell 2 or more times in the prior year, and twice as likely to be the cause of the accident. That's kind of astronomical when you think of how many people are turning 65 every single day, how many millions are still driving in the United States. And particularly since we're all in California, we have the highest driving rates, and we have the worst mass transit. So a history of frequent falling can serve as a valid indicator of identifying older drivers that are at high risk. And the reason that there's many reasons for that, some of which are balance. We're going to get into medication. There's a myriad of reasons, all of which are indicators. So we have to pay attention to what we're seeing with our clients.
Speaking of medication, these are a big result. A lot of people falling can be tied to medications that they may not be aware of, medications that are prescribed to them, as well as over-the-counter medications that might be taken for allergies, for headaches, for migraines, for all kinds of things. These can turn into prescription cocktails. There are so many pills that are mixing together that that may be affecting the person's ability to metabolize them, especially as we age. So the major problem is 95%, according to AAA, 95% of seniors use medications that do impair their driving. So we know this to be true. And yet people might have a few medications. They may be taking blood pressure medication. They may be feeling maybe dizzy, getting some vertigo. They may go back to the doctor and get additional medications for the symptoms that they're getting from the first 3 medications. And this can snowball. There was a study done where 630 adults around 70 years of age were asked, and only 28% acknowledged that there was some awareness that they had, there may be some impact that their medication had on their driving. People don't seem to always make that connection. They feel that, well, the doctor prescribed them for me. They must be okay. The doctor knows I'm driving. And so there doesn't seem to be a concern about the fact that these prescription cocktails might be building up. People might end up with more and more drugs that they can't really adapt to them, and they might find that they're getting drowsy behind the wheel. It might be impacting their ability to coordinate their movements. And I had a friend of mine who had a stroke and was in the hospital and had some internal bleeding that caused pain in the leg and eventually a problem with the use of his left leg. Was discharged from the hospital on several different medications for sleep, for pain, for nerve damage, and was prescribed morphine and was told to take it in the morning and at night. Well, 3 or 4 weeks later, when I saw him and he was doing much better, I asked him, why are you still taking morphine? And he said, oh, well, the doctor told me to take it in the morning and at night. I asked him if he had any pain, which is usually what morphine is prescribed for, severe pain and help with pain management. And he said, no, he had no pain, but he was still taking it because no one told him to stop. And he still had a whole bunch of pills in his prescription. These are things that happen all the time, that people just continue to take medications and not aware of how they may be affecting them. This is also often referred to as polypharmacy, taking excessive or unnecessary meds that they don't usually need. There are people that have told us they've been taking medications for the past 10 years. They just keep refilling their prescriptions because no one told them to stop. And in the meantime, other prescriptions have been added to that. And it's most commonly among the elderly, 40% of adults, 65 and older. And this prescribing cascade that we call it, they very often, the drugs are misdiagnosed as symptoms for other ailments, not necessarily being related to the drugs themselves. And so, like we said, this can continue this snowball effect of the prescribing of medications that really can impact seriously a person's ability to drive safely. This is a great resource that we highly recommend people check into. This might be a good way of talking to an older adult about their driving and your concerns about their medication. Go to this roadwiserx.com and show them how we can type in the name of your medication and it will tell us how it affects your ability to drive. And sometimes that's a really good way of educating someone on, wow, I guess maybe that's why I've been feeling like I want to nod out when I drive for too long, or maybe that's why I feel like my balance is off more. And this is a really good tool that we recommend people use when they're bringing this up with people. Oh yeah, go ahead, I'm sorry.
So part of our conversation with seniors could be about money, especially where we live. The fact that that it's $5, around $5 or more per gallon, unless you go to my Costco. It's huge. It's huge to cost to own a car today. Car payments, car insurance, maintenance, car registration. Just buying gas right now is crazy. So for seniors who, especially on a fixed income, sometimes part of the conversation could be discussing the finances and how much less it would cost to have a taxi, or depending on what community you live in, there's so many other resources for there's Uber, there's also a lot of local agencies that will provide lower cost transportation, like paratransit. According to the AAA in 2020, and I know it's much more now for a myriad of reasons, they said it was just under $10,000 a year to own and maintain a car if you traveled 15,000 miles a year. Well, in today's world, just 2 years later, after COVID and the cost of fuel, just getting the parts for maintenance is different. Financially and time-wise, it's a whole different thing. My husband's car has been in the shop for 4 weeks because of a warranty repair, and everything got fixed except they have still not received the oil they need to put in the car. So there's a myriad of reasons to look at what it really costs in today's world. When we think about having the conversation, the fact of the matter is we can't have the conversation until we ourselves know what are the options, because we know for ourselves the most important. Like, I can't imagine losing my my right to drive. I can't imagine losing that freedom, although I think about it often because of what I do for a living. I think about what would I do, and that's me thinking proactively. Most of us aren't thinking like that. So the people we're going to be dealing with, how can we start thinking about ways that might make it easier for them? They don't have to get in the car and go every time they think they need a screw or a widget or a whatchamacallit, or a cup of coffee, or what are the other ways that we can help provide ideas for them to have their needs met? Uh, Mail in, we can order things online. They can order things online. And if they're not good at the computer, maybe they have a kid, a grandkid, a friend, all of the things that are listed here. There's a lot of service providers in all of our areas, different ones that are accessible. Is there a neighbor? Is there a friend that they really like to see frequently? Maybe every week they go out to lunch. Maybe every week they go to their sewing club or their knitting club or whatever that is. Just starting to taking an active interest in finding out resources and other ways to get places. My mother lost her ability to drive years before she died, and she had, to her credit, taken a lot of steps to get her needs met, some of which included her friends in the organizations she frequented. There was always somebody willing to come get her and bring her home. So, are home deliveries possible? Most of us in the Bay Area, we're going to have to say all of these things are very easily accessible. Again, some people are not going to be easy with the computer. And some people, you may not want them to be easy with the computer if they have a shopping problem. I've noticed that with a couple of clients. One of the things that we can always do is find out what community agencies are in our town that will provide services, visits. Who in the family can we get to make a call every week or an email every week? Or more importantly, what I've noticed lately is the lost art of writing, handwriting a note or a card and putting it in the mail. And there's something extraordinary about receiving a thoughtful note, and it doesn't have to be much in the mail, but that could be life-changing for somebody who is giving up this freedom of going and coming and going as they please on their own terms. There's
Yeah.
nothing like a handwritten note. Go ahead, Greta.
No, yeah. So after all of these great suggestions and resources and options that we can provide, what happens after all of that if the person still refuses to retire from driving?
Well,
What else can we do? DJ?
it's really difficult. We're going to get to what we really provide here. However, in advance of that, what we want to do is have everybody around this person that's willing to be supportive in having that person understand that it's over without them feeling punished or it being punitive. So, a lot of older people have a certain rapport and respect for anybody, an officer of the law. So if you have a friend or a neighbor that happens to be a cop of some kind, they could just gently be taking a walk in the neighborhood and saying, I understand you've got this directive and I want you to know that it's really important that you follow it, or very softly and gently. The whole thing about this is with respect and compassion and loving kindness. That's going to go a long way as opposed to being, like a demand or a directive.
And we know that people with dementia very often forget that they are not driving anymore or haven't driven in a while. And then one day, all of a sudden, just decide to go and get into their car. So there's ways of distracting the person who might have those kind of cognitive impairments, distract them or bring something else in to do with them, or take them somewhere if they've been talking about going somewhere, so that they can help them forget about it. Other things that are suggested are like putting the keys in a safe place, or replacing the keys in the car with something else that doesn't work.
I had a client that last year that had alcohol-related dementia, and we were working really hard to keep her out of her car. You would think the 50 steps from where her car was parked to her house would be a deterrent, but no. She wanted to get in the car in the worst way, and she wanted to get to the store, and she still wanted her alcohol. And we had successfully removed that from her, and we had thought we had hidden the keys, but she had another key fob, and lost somewhere in her car, so it would go. What ultimately we had to do was we did call the police. I called the police and said, I am going to move her car and she will be calling you to report it stolen, which is what happened. And then it took another couple of weeks, but her brother, who had power of attorney, had the car towed and returned to the Volvo dealer because there was no other way to prevent her from driving. And the other thing is, right now I have a friend who has dementia and his license was taken, and it's been an extremely painful situation. However, long before that happened, his mechanic, who was also a friend, and we all saw the writing on the wall, put a dead switch in his car that Craig can't remember is there, that if he just clicked the switch, he would be able to start his car. And my wish is for his son to just simply sell it, because once it's not there, that knee-jerk reaction to go into his car, which is his safe place, will be gone. There's just creative and innovative ways, and every situation is going to be unique.
And another way too, if they continue to refuse to drive, is to create a family agreement, driving agreement. And that's between the senior driver and their family. So it doesn't, like in that moment, restrict them from driving, but it helps empower the senior to make the decision to designate a person that they would trust in the future to keep them safe. And it helps the senior to maintain their dignity. It gives them they're part of the conversation and the decision, and it helps really with the process where they can come up with what does the agreement say? What are the driving restrictions that the family members all agree upon? Or is there a date that they're going to choose to just stop driving altogether. So it's not a legal contract, but it's just something that families can do together, and maybe even just say, well, you know what, we thought that this would be a good way to start addressing how to plan your safe driving in the future. We want to make sure you're safe, and it would make us feel better if we could actually agree on this and use it as a document to refer to. And that's the hope, that they would be part of the process. And that brings us to our program, the Enhanced Self-Assessment Program.
Right. The important part of this statement is it's a self-assessment program. And we provide the opportunity for a driver to meet with us in the comfort of their own home, at their own kitchen table, just them and one of us, to have a learning conversation, an in-depth learning conversation, to learn really about that person and their driving history and the things that they've enjoyed and valued over their time in life. And then embedded in the conversation will be some tests, both written and some physical, that will be informative to the driver and us in helping determine whether or not driving safely is still an option. And very often at the very end, we will provide, always at the end, we will provide our verbal report to the driver. And then we always provide a written report within 10 days that is very extensive and very informed and includes all the results of our time together. And we will ask them to please let us know who else we can, in advance, we will ask them, who else can we share this information with? Because before we even get to their kitchen table, an adult child, or maybe one of you, or maybe a social worker, or somebody else has informed us that there's a concern about this driver for whatever reason. Mostly for us, it's usually dementia related. And what we're doing is assessing all of those decisions around safe choice making. And with our report, in the end of our testing, our assessing, we actually will say exactly what we think. And we can tell you we've had really successful results because there's buy-in. No adult child is telling them what they think. No wife or husband is telling them what they think. Those are the people we're going to go this to, right? I can hear from you what I can't hear from my husband a lot of the time, if it's conflicting with what my real desires are. So that's true for a senior that's looking at potentially retiring from driving.
Yeah, and the reason why, I think it's 2/3 of the people that we do these self-assessments for end up deciding to retire from driving is because of what DJ explained. The learning conversation really is designed to build rapport, build trust with the person, asking them personal stories to share about their favorite car when they were younger or favorite vacation that they took, and really asking them personal questions about their lives and wanting to know about some of the medications that they're taking and sharing some resources for things that they might need. So the main purpose of the conversation, even prior to doing some of the exercises, is to establish that trust so that the person really does open up and knows that we care about them, and also knows we're not there to take their keys. Ultimately, it is their decision, and very often they will be surprised at the results. DJ and I sat in on an assessment recently where the older driver had Parkinson's and really thought that his driving abilities were perfectly fine, were not at all impacted by his condition. And at the end of the assessment, learned all the different things that he miscalculated, misjudged, inability to complete certain tasks and activities and exercises, and seemed very surprised at the end to learn that his skills were not what he thought they were. And the recommendation was that he should seriously would, consider retiring from driving.
He actually agreed to do that. However, we have a witness that saw him driving the next day. And I want to say that's not unusual that somebody would want to at least one more drive before they say farewell. So, I mean, it's not an absolute, it's a process. But, our experience is it's a kinder and more respectful process. And it gets a lot, there's a lot less fear and resentment at the end. And that's what we want to see for all of our end of our life. The National Highway Traffic and Safety Association says we are going to outlive our safe driving capacity by 7 to 10 years because we're living longer. So that's something that's true for all of us.
And yes, and so that getting back to the title of our presentation, the point is to bring a peaceful resolution by having the conversation in a sensitive, caring way, that you might be the one person to bring up the topic and maybe save someone's life or spare a really bad, serious accident from happening, which is really the purpose is, we know that we can make a big difference by being that person, whether we bring it up to the family, whether we talk to a physician, but that at least it gets addressed and that the person is respected and engaged in the decision making is what our program is really all about. So that being said, here is our contact information. We appreciate your being so attentive and quiet. We can't hear anybody, so that's, but this is our contact information. You can feel free to reach out to us with any questions. I know that we want to maybe ask Caitlin if there were any questions in the chat that maybe we could address at this point while we have some time.
Yes. Hi, Loretta and DJ, and thank you again for another wonderful training. And please, everyone, take note of their contact information there. DJ, you just addressed something that this question that I have here from Alex directly relates to what you said. She says, I read a study once that suggested that older Americans will not be able to drive and should not drive during the last few years of their life. The statistics were different for men and women. As I recall, it was the last 5 years for men and the last 7 years for women. This means that if we live to our 80s, all of us are looking at retiring from driving. Are you familiar with any such research?
I just have that statistic from the National Highway Traffic Safety Association, so I might look at that and see if it has more in-depth information. But I mean, I don't know if 80s is really necessarily. I don't know that a particular age is the answer here necessarily.
Because everyone ages differently.
Right. I just think we have to be mindful. I mean, I'm 67 going on 68, and I know that I'm not as sharp, the sharp tack I was 20 years ago. So that's got to be true for everybody else. It's just being
And
honest.
yes, and although we focus on the older adult, in this presentation, I mean, there are people that have medical conditions that are much younger that also can, be having an effect on their ability to drive safely. And we still need to find a way to have a conversation about that rather than avoid it. So I just wanted to make that point.
Yeah, I don't want to stick to an age specific situation. It's just true. As we age, we get slower, but because of the way our medical system is, that medication is so important a part of our lives now, all of those things have to be considered.
You know, one of the things that I had been reading about was that one of the biggest distractions for older drivers is technology, not in
Mm,
the same way as younger drivers who might be looking at a cell phone or something like that, but really more about the bells and whistles of newer cars. So sometimes a family member might say, you know, oh, here's a newer car to drive or gift that elder with a particular new transportation device. And
mhm.
it isn't always the best thing. Have you seen anything like that happen when people are faced with new technology, even when they get a rental car, something like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I have. My mom's best friend is turning 90 next month, and she's the last of the three of them. And she bought herself a new car last year. And she had to be careful about what she got because she can't have all those distractions.
Mhm. And also some of the newer cars, I know someone in their 70s who has a Tesla, and because of his diminished vision and other medical problems, felt that this was a safe car for him to drive because a lot of times he didn't have to really be driving. The car drove itself. Well, there is a big screen in the car and things appear on the screen, and that can be a real distraction. And so again, that's another situation where a conversation has to be had about, being safe. Even if you have a self-driving vehicle, you still have to be mindful of the self-driving mechanism can turn off if there's a change in the lines on the lane. I found out when the car jerked because one of the lines, the white lines, disappeared in the highway, and that throws the car off. Well, we have to be mindful of that. We can't just feel that person is safe because it's a self-driving electric car.
And a lot of the newer cars also stop on their own if they
Mhm.
think you're too close to a car. And part of what we're talking about older drivers is how easily uh, the odd thing can throw them off in terms of keeping their focus. So I think all of those things need to be considered.
Within your program, do you recommend any kind of strength and coordination training for older drivers? Because we know that, you know, impairment of vision and hearing and, you know, even stiff joints, you know, flexibility and so forth can contribute to slower reflexes. Within your program, do you make any recommendations around strengthening any of those through any particular exercises or programs?
We're not prescribing anything. We're just guiding somebody and doing an assessment. We do know, and we talk about it, we do know that exercise makes a difference. All exercise makes a difference, whether it's strength or coordination. But our program isn't about fixing the problem necessarily.
And we do provide resources like it may be a situation where a person uh, is still able to drive safely, but maybe due to a physical limitation needs to have some adaptations or, equipment added to their car to allow them to maintain their independence. But that is a separate thing that we would refer to.
Got it.
Mhm.
What about the California DMV simulator? Can you speak to that at all?
No,
That's more of a written thing. I just wanted to know if you had any dealings with that.
no, we haven't.
Yeah, and we don't get in the car with people, like DJ said, when we do a self-assessment, it's in their home where they're comfortable and feel safe, and we don't take them out. We don't do any kind of actual driving simulations or anything. I don't know about what they do at the DMV necessarily.
Right. It seems to me that your program is great for police to know about. In fact, you spoke about Matt Gurwell, who developed this program. He's a former Ohio highway patrolman, as I recall. Uh, and this, it seems to me, would be great for police highway patrolmen to know about all across the country. You do outreach to them?
We haven't. I haven't personally. Loretta and I haven't personally, but definitely on the list.
Yes, we're hoping to reach out to them and let them know about what we do and see how we could work together also.
Great. I do not see any other questions in the hopper at this time, but I just want to thank you both again so very, very much for being here. It has been great to have this two-part series as part of our IOA trainings, and we really, really value your work and commend all of you. And we know Matt's watching this today, so
Hi, Matt.
thank you, Matt, for having developed this. I also want to remind everybody, I just put in the chat feature, there is a survey at the end of this. Grab that SurveyMonkey link right now, and anyone can take this survey afterwards. I'll be providing that information to Loretta and DJ after another day or so. But if you are getting CEUs or any kind of credential certification from me, you will need to take that survey. So be sure and do that as soon as possible. I just want to thank everybody once again, including our attendees for today, and we will stay in touch. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us, really.
Thank you very much.
It was great to have you here. Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.